Ma'am, I told you to leave. This is your last warning.
I'm sitting on a public bench. I'm breaking no law, and you know it.
Don't argue with me. Hand me your ID, now.
I already did. You're detaining me without cause, officer.
Stand up. You're under arrest.
Remember this moment.
Officer Kyle Reed had been patrolling the upscale commercial districts of Chicago for 7 years when he made the decision that would implode his life, humiliate his department, and cost the taxpayers of Chicago $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, a man who carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed the badge on his chest granted him immunity from consequence. He walked with a heavy stride, his thumbs often hooked into his tactical vest eyes, scanning not for safety, but for submission. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, amidst the marble fountains and manicured hedges of Sterling Plaza, Reed received a dispatch call that should have been routine. Instead, it became the final chapter of his law enforcement career. The subject of the call was Eleanor Vance, a 54-year-old woman sitting quietly on a public bench reviewing files on a tablet while enjoying a cup of herbal tea. Eleanor was not a vagrant. She was not a threat. She was the appointed director of the Office of Public Integrity, the very agency charged with investigating police misconduct and municipal corruption. But Officer Reed didn't know that. He didn't care to know that. All he saw was a black woman in a space where he believed she didn't belong, and that was enough for him to destroy his own future. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, I want to ask, where are you tuning in from today? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe that authority without accountability is tyranny, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth often hides in the paperwork, and we are here to dig it out. Sterling Plaza is the crown jewel of the downtown loop. It is an open-air sanctuary of commerce flanked by glass skyscrapers and high-end retail boutiques that sell handbags costing more than most people's cars. It is a place designed for the wealthy, for the tourists, for the power players of the city to eat their artisanal salads and make deals. It was 11:30 a.m. The autumn sun was bright but not warm, casting long shadows across the granite pavers. Eleanor Vance had chosen a bench near the central fountain. She was dressed in a tailored navy wool coat, a silk scarf, and leather boots that spoke of quality and restraint. She had been the director of the Office of Public Integrity for 3 years, a position she had earned after 2 decades as a federal prosecutor. She was a woman of immense intellect and even greater patience, known in the halls of City Hall as the scalpel, for her ability to surgically remove corruption without killing the host. That Tuesday, she had slipped out of her office for an hour of quiet. She was reviewing a sensitive dossier regarding kickbacks in the sanitation department. She needed fresh air. She needed clarity. She sat with her posture perfect, her reading glasses perched on her nose, scrolling through PDFs on her tablet. She bothered no one. She spoke to no one. But in the ecosystem of Sterling Plaza, her presence was being monitored with hostile intent. To the casual observer, the plaza was peaceful. Businessmen in gray suits ate sandwiches. Tourists took selfies by the bronze lion statues. But inside Velour and Hyde, a luxury leather goods store directly facing Eleanor's bench, Julianne Ford was watching with narrowing eyes. Julianne was 34 years old. The store manager, a woman who prided herself on her ability to spot undesirables before they even crossed the threshold. She had been managing the boutique for 4 years and had cultivated an atmosphere of exclusionary elegance. To Julianne, the plaza outside her window was an extension of her showroom, and she felt a proprietary duty to curate it. She had been watching Eleanor for 20 minutes. In Julianne's worldview, a woman like Eleanor didn't fit the aesthetic of a leisurely lunch in Sterling Plaza. Why wasn't she shopping? Why was she just sitting there? Why did she have a tablet? Was she recording the security shift changes? Was she signaling to accomplices? Julianne's imagination, fueled by years of unexamined prejudice, began to spin a narrative of criminal intent. A black woman sitting alone wasn't a citizen enjoying public space. She was a suspect loitering with intent. Julianne paced behind the glass display of $2,000 clutches, her irritation growing into a self-righteous panic. She justified her bias as vigilance. "We can't have people just hanging around," she muttered to her assistant, a young woman who looked confused but dared not disagree. "It makes the paying customers nervous." In reality, no customer had even glanced at Eleanor. The only person nervous was Julianne, whose discomfort with black presence in her space was an itch she couldn't scratch. After watching for another 10 minutes, Julianne decided she had seen enough. She didn't walk out to ask Eleanor if she needed anything. She didn't call Plaza Security. She went straight to the nuclear option. She picked up the phone and dialed the police non-emergency line, her voice dropping into a practiced tone of distressed concern. "Yes, this is the manager at Velour and Hyde in Sterling Plaza. I need an officer dispatched immediately. There's a woman outside who has been loitering for nearly an hour. She's casing the store. I've seen her taking photos of our security cameras, and she's refusing to leave." The dispatcher asked if the woman was aggressive. "She's exhibiting suspicious behavior." Julianne lied, her voice trembling with fake anxiety. "My customers are afraid to enter the shop. Please send someone before something happens." The die was cast. A lie born of bias was now traveling through the radio waves, seeking a weapon to enforce it. That weapon was Officer Kyle Reed. When the call came through, Reed was only 3 blocks away, idling in his cruiser and scrolling through his phone. He perked up at the code for a suspicious person, loitering. Reed had been with the department for 7 years, and in that time, he had curated a personnel file that read like a warning label the city had forgotten to read. 14 complaints. 14 citizens who had formally gone on record to say that Officer Reed was aggressive, rude, discriminatory, or prone to using force where none was needed. He was a disciple of the broken windows theory of policing, but he applied it with a sledgehammer. He believed that order was maintained not through community trust, but through the immediate and overwhelming assertion of dominance. He had a reputation in the precinct locker room as a go-getter, a euphemism used by older officers to describe someone who generated stats, but also generated lawsuits. Of his 14 complaints, 12 had been dismissed as unfounded or exonerated by an internal review system that was designed to protect the badge rather than the public. The other 2 had resulted in a single day of suspension and a mandatory seminar on cultural sensitivity, which Reed had spent looking at his watch. He viewed the complaints not as feedback, but as battle scars, proof that he was doing the job that soft civilians didn't understand. His supervisors knew he was a liability. The sergeant had noted in his last 2 performance reviews that Reed struggled with de-escalation and needed to improve community interactions. But in a department short on manpower and high on crime stats, a warm body in a uniform was better than a vacancy. So Reed remained on the street, his authority unchecked, his bias validated by the silence of his superiors. When he heard the dispatcher describe a suspicious female refusing to leave, his mind immediately painted a picture. He didn't see a director of ethics. He saw a nuisance. He saw someone defying the social order. He saw an opportunity to flex. "Show me en route," Reed said into his radio, throwing the cruiser into gear. He didn't know he was driving toward a cliff. Reed pulled his cruiser up onto the curb of Sterling Plaza tires, crunching over the decorative brickwork. He parked aggressively, blocking the pedestrian path, a visual announcement that he had arrived. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his belt, and scanned the area. It was lunch hour. There were dozens of people sitting on benches. 2 white men in suits were laughing loudly on a bench 10 feet away. A group of teenagers was skateboarding near the fountain. A young mother was feeding her child on the grass. Reed ignored them all. His eyes locked instantly on Eleanor Vance. She matched the description: black female, blue coat, sitting alone. In Reed's mind, the investigation was already over. The manager had called, which meant the woman was a problem. His job was simply to remove the problem. He didn't pause to observe. He didn't watch her behavior. He walked directly toward her, cutting a line through the crowd, his face set in a scowl intended to intimidate. Eleanor was deep in a paragraph about misappropriated pension funds when a shadow fell across her screen. She didn't jump. She didn't look startled. She finished the sentence she was reading, then slowly raised her head. She saw Officer Reed standing 3 feet away, his hand resting near his holster, his stance wide and aggressive. "Can I help you, officer?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, modulated the voice of a woman who had cross-examined murderers and negotiated with mayors. Reed didn't like her tone. It was too steady, too confident. It wasn't the tone of someone who knew their place. "We got a call about loitering," Reed barked loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "You need to move along." Eleanor took a sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving his face. "Loitering," she repeated. "I'm sitting on a public bench in a public plaza during my lunch hour. I'm not loitering. I'm resting." Reed took a step closer, invading her personal space. "The manager of the store over there says you're casing the place, says you're making people uncomfortable. So you can either leave voluntarily, or I can help you leave. Your choice." Eleanor glanced at the boutique, seeing Julianne Ford hovering in the window phone in hand. She looked back at Reed. "Officer, I haven't looked at that store. I am reading a document. I have every right to be here, just like those gentlemen over there." She gestured to the white men in suits. "Did you ask them to move?" Reed's face flushed. He wasn't used to pushback. He was used to fear. "I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. This is private property managed by the plaza, and you've been asked to leave." "Actually," Eleanor corrected him, "Sterling Plaza is a public-private partnership. The land is owned by the city of Chicago. The maintenance is private, but the access is public. It is a First Amendment protected space. I suggest you check your municipal code, specifically Title 10, Chapter 8. This was the moment Reed should have walked away. The specific citation of municipal code, the calm demeanor, the expensive clothing, all of it screamed that this was not a routine encounter. But Reed was incapable of backing down. His ego was a fragile construct that required constant reinforcement. To retreat now in front of the gathering crowd of onlookers would be a defeat. "I don't need a law lesson from you," Reed snapped. "I need ID, now." Eleanor sighed a sound of profound disappointment. She reached for her handbag. "I am going to reach into my bag to get my identification," she narrated, ensuring the witnesses heard her. "I am doing exactly what you asked." Reed tensed his hand, twitching on his belt. Eleanor pulled out a slim leather wallet. She didn't pull out a driver's license. She pulled out her City of Chicago credentials, a heavy card with the city seal, a gold chip, and the bold words, "Office of Public Integrity, Director." She held it up. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a city official, and you are making a very expensive mistake." Reed looked at the ID. He saw the seal. He saw the title. But his brain, wired for confirmation bias, rejected the data. A black woman loitering on a bench couldn't be a city director. It was impossible. The ID had to be fake. He had seen fake IDs before, usually on teenagers trying to buy beer. This was just a high-quality forgery. "Nice try," Reed scoffed, snatching the ID from her hand. "You think I'm stupid? You can buy these online." Eleanor's eyes went cold. "Officer, that is a government-issued credential. If you run my name, you will see that I report directly to the mayor's office." "Stand up," Reed commanded, dropping the ID into his pocket. "You're under arrest." "For what crime?" Eleanor asked, remaining seated. "For failure to obey a lawful order, for trespassing, and for presenting a false government document." The crowd had grown significantly. Tourists were holding up phones. A young man in a hoodie was live streaming. "She showed you her ID," someone shouted. "She didn't do anything," another voice cried out. Reed ignored them. He grabbed Eleanor's arm. "I said stand up." He yanked her to her feet with unnecessary force, spinning her around. Eleanor did not resist physically. She knew that any movement could be interpreted as aggression. She allowed herself to be manhandled, her arm twisted behind her back. "I am complying," she said loudly, her voice projecting to the cameras. "I am not resisting. Officer, you are hurting my shoulder. I have a prior injury." "Stop resisting then," Reed yelled, reciting the script he used to justify force. He slapped the handcuffs on her wrists, cinching them tight, punishingly tight. He shoved her forward, causing her to stumble. Eleanor regained her balance, her face a mask of steely resolve. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that I offered you my credentials, and you chose to ignore them, because this is the moment your career ended." Reed laughed, a short, sharp bark of dismissal. Yeah, tell it to the judge." He marched her through the plaza, past the gawking lunch crowd, past Julianne Ford, who was watching with a smug smile of satisfaction, and toward his patrol car. He shoved Eleanor into the back seat, the hard plastic uncushioned and unforgiving. He slammed the door, sealing her in. As he walked around to the driver's side, he felt a surge of adrenaline. He had cleaned up the street. He had shown the crowd who was in charge. He felt powerful. He had no idea that the woman in his back seat was already drafting the subpoena list in her head. The drive to the precinct was a 12-minute journey through the heart of the city. Eleanor sat in the back, her wrists burning from the tight metal, her shoulder throbbing. She closed her eyes and began to breathe rhythmically, controlling her heart rate. She was not a victim. She was a prosecutor gathering evidence. She memorized the time, 11:48 a.m. She memorized the route. She memorized Reed's badge number, which she had glimpsed on his chest, number 4922. She listened to him talking on his radio. "One female in custody. Loitering, resisting possession of forged documents." She didn't say a word. She knew that anything she said would be twisted. Silence was her shield. Reed glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He was unnerved by her silence. Usually people screamed, they cried, they begged, they cursed. Eleanor just stared out the window, her expression unreadable. "You know," Reed said, trying to provoke a reaction, "if you'd just listened, you could be finishing your lunch right now. You brought this on yourself." Eleanor didn't blink. She didn't turn her head. She treated his words like background noise, irrelevant static. Reed turned up the radio, drowning out the quiet that was starting to feel oppressive. He pulled into the underground garage of the 1st District Precinct, the tires squealing on the concrete. This was his house. He felt safe here. He parked the car and hauled Eleanor out, marching her toward the intake elevator. "Let's go. Don't trip," he sneered. They rode the elevator up to the booking floor. The doors opened, and Reed pushed her out into the bustling, chaotic energy of the precinct. Telephones were ringing, officers were typing reports, a drunk man was singing in a holding cell. At the high desk sat Watch Commander Reynolds, a 58-year-old veteran with gray hair and a face etched with the exhaustion of 30 years on the job. Reynolds was a good cop, a man who tried to hold the line in a department that was fraying at the edges. He was currently stressed because the Office of Public Integrity was conducting a surprise audit of the district's disciplinary files, and the auditors had been tearing the place apart for 3 days. Reed walked Eleanor up to the desk, chest puffed out. "Got a good one, Sarge," Reed announced. "Refused to leave Sterling Plaza. Manager called it in, claimed she was casing the store. Then she tried to pass off some fake City Hall ID. Reynolds didn't look up immediately. He was signing a form. "Did she now?" he muttered. "Let's see the ID." Reed reached into his pocket and tossed Eleanor's credentials onto the high counter. The heavy plastic clattered against the wood. Reynolds finished his signature, put down his pen, and picked up the ID. He looked at it. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at it again. The color drained from Reynolds' face so fast it looked like he had been shot. His hands started to shake. He looked up at Eleanor, who was standing there in handcuffs. Her coat ruffled her eyes, drilling into his soul. Reynolds knew Eleanor Vance. He had sat across from her in hearings. He had been grilled by her on policy failures. He knew that she was the single most powerful oversight official in the city, a woman with the authority to recommend the firing of the chief of police. And she was standing in his booking area, handcuffed by an officer who had 14 complaints in his file. "Reed," Reynolds whispered, his voice strangulated by sheer terror. "Do you know who this is?" Reed looked confused. "Yeah, some lady with a fake badge." Reynolds slammed his hand on the desk, a sound like a gunshot that silenced the entire room. "This is Director Eleanor Vance, the director of the Office of Public Integrity. She is the one auditing this damn precinct right now." Reed's smirk vanished. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the ID, then at Eleanor, then back at Reynolds. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. The air left his lungs. "Get those cuffs off her!" Reynolds roared, coming around the desk. "Now get them off her right now!" Reed fumbled for his keys, his hands trembling so violently he dropped them. Reynolds shoved him aside, snatched the keys from the floor, and unlocked the handcuffs himself. "Director Vance," Reynolds stammered. I don't know what to say. I am so incredibly sorry. This is a misunderstanding." Eleanor rubbed her wrists, looking at the deep red indentations left by the metal. She took a slow breath, composing herself. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She simply turned her gaze to Officer Reed, who was shrinking against the wall, looking like a child who had broken a priceless vase. "It is not a misunderstanding, Commander," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the silence of the room. "It is a pattern. It is a practice. And it ends today." She turned to Reed. "Officer, I am placing you under administrative arrest for unlawful detainment and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. You will surrender your badge and your service weapon to Commander Reynolds immediately." Reed looked at Reynolds, pleading with his eyes for backup. Reynolds just stared back, his face hard. "Do it, Reed," Reynolds said coldly. "Give it up." Reed unholstered his gun, his hands shaking, and placed it on the counter. Then he unpinned his badge, the badge he had hidden behind for 7 years, and laid it next to the weapon. He looked naked without them. Smaller. "Commander," Eleanor continued, "I want the body camera footage from this incident pulled and secured on a separate server within the hour. I want the dispatch logs. I want the call recording from the manager at Velour and Hyde. And I want this officer processed. You will treat him with more dignity than he treated me, but you will process him." She paused, looking around the room at the other officers who were watching in stunned silence. "This is what happens when you refuse to police your own. If you won't do it, I will." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video of the arrest captured by the teenager in the plaza hit the internet before Eleanor had even left the station. By the evening news, it was the lead story in the country. Chicago City Director arrested for eating lunch. The optics were indefensible. The mayor, furious and embarrassed, held a press conference the next morning, apologizing to Eleanor and promising a scorched earth investigation. But Eleanor didn't need promises. She had the law. Officer Kyle Reed was fired 4 weeks later. The internal investigation, led by Eleanor's own deputy to avoid conflict of interest, was merciless. It uncovered not just the 14 prior complaints, but a pattern of falsifying reports to justify stops. Reed was decertified by the state board, meaning he could never work as a police officer in Illinois again. He lost his pension. He lost his career. At 29, he was a pariah, his name permanently attached to a textbook example of racial profiling. Julianne Ford fared no better. The corporate headquarters of Velour and Hyde, facing a massive boycott and social media firestorm, fired her the day after the incident. They released a statement condemning her actions and announcing a donation to civil rights organizations, but the brand was tarnished. Julianne, who had called the police to protect her store's image, had single-handedly destroyed it. The lawsuit Eleanor filed against the city was settled for $6.5 million. It was one of the largest individual settlements for a wrongful arrest in the city's history. But for Eleanor, the money was secondary. She used her leverage to force a consent decree that mandated independent oversight for all suspicious person stops and required that officers verify credentials before making arrests of municipal employees. Yet, as the dust settled, there was no triumphant music. 6 months later, Eleanor sat on a bench in a different park. She was still the director. She had won. But she was tired. She watched a young black girl reading a book on a swing set, and she felt a heavy ache in her chest. The settlement didn't change the fact that for 20 minutes her decades of service, her education, her title, and her humanity had been erased by a man who saw only her skin color. It didn't change the fear she had felt in the back of that car. It didn't change the reality that if she hadn't been the director, if she had been a teacher or a nurse or a mother without a title, she might still be in a cell charged with crimes she didn't commit. Justice was served. Yes. But justice is a remedy, not a cure. The disease was still there, lurking in the quiet assumptions of shop managers, in the aggressive swagger of officers, in the silence of good people who watch and do nothing. Eleanor took a sip of her tea. She would keep fighting. She would keep working. But she knew with a clarity that broke her heart that the price of her existence in public was a constant, exhausting defense of her right to be there. Should public officials be immune from qualified immunity when they violate civil rights? Do you think the settlement was enough to change the culture of the department? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us keep the light shining on these stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop demanding the truth.
Stand up. This is a private HOA park. You're being detained for trespassing. Show me your ID, now.
Officer, we live 3 blocks from here. I'm Dr. Marcus Ross. We're not committing a crime.
I didn't ask for a story. I asked for ID. Hands where I...
Officer Brock Danner had been with the Scottsdale Police Department for 5 years when he made a decision that would not only obliterate his career, but would also cost the taxpayers of Arizona $6.4 million. He was 32 years old, a man who prided himself on what he called proactive policing, a term that his supervisors used in performance reviews to describe his aggressive instincts, but which the community would soon come to know as racial profiling. It was a Tuesday afternoon, bright and unseasonably warm, the kind of day that draws people out of their air-conditioned homes to enjoy the desert sun. Brock Danner was on patrol, cruising the wide, palm-lined avenues of the Silverleaf District, a neighborhood of multi-million-dollar estates, manicured golf courses, and quiet exclusivity. He felt like the guardian of the gate, the protector of the peace for people who paid a premium for privacy. But his judgment, clouded by an arrogance that had never been checked, was about to lead him into a confrontation with a force far greater than his badge. At 12:15 p.m., Danner received a dispatch call regarding suspicious subjects trespassing in Heritage Oak Park. The subjects in question were Elena and Marcus Ross. They were not trespassing. They were not suspicious. They were in fact 2 of the most distinguished residents of the community. Dr. Marcus Ross, 56, was the chief of thoracic surgery at the finest hospital in the state, a man whose hands had saved thousands of lives. His wife, Elena Ross, 54, was a United States magistrate judge, a federal jurist whose signature authorized the very search warrants officers like Danner relied upon to do their jobs. They were enjoying a rare afternoon off, sitting on a high-end picnic blanket, eating artisanal cheese and drinking sparkling water. But to Officer Brock Danner, they were simply 2 black people in a park where he didn't think they belonged. What followed was a masterclass in incompetence and bias that would leave the department reeling. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of authority, where are you watching from today? If you believe that justice should be blind, but accountability should be visible, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us tell the stories that the system tries to hide. Heritage Oak Park is a private enclave within the Silverleaf community. It isn't a public playground. It's a meticulously landscaped expanse of green reserved for the residents of the Homeowners Association. It features imported oak trees, a central fountain made of limestone, and walking paths that are swept daily. It is a place of silence and money. At noon on a Tuesday, it is usually empty, save for the occasional landscaper or nanny pushing a stroller. Elena and Marcus Ross had lived in Silverleaf for 12 years. Their home, a sprawling Mediterranean estate, was 3 blocks from the park. They had paid their HOA dues. They had every right to be there. Elena was wearing a cream-colored linen sundress and reading a biography. Marcus was in a polo shirt and shorts, checking emails on his tablet. They looked like exactly what they were, a successful middle-aged couple enjoying the fruits of their labor. However, the tranquility of their afternoon was already being dismantled by a woman watching them from behind the plantation shutters of a house across the street. Tiffany Miller was 34 years old, a mid-level marketing executive who was currently working from home, which on this day meant spying on her neighbors. Tiffany had moved to the neighborhood 6 months prior. She didn't know the Rosses. She didn't know the history of the community. What she knew was that she was protective of her property values, and when she looked out her window and saw a black couple setting up a picnic on the immaculate grass, her mind immediately went to a dark, biased place. She didn't see a federal judge and a surgeon. She saw outsiders. She saw a threat. She watched them for 10 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into indignation. They were eating food. They were relaxing. In Tiffany's mind, they were too comfortable. They must be scouting the neighborhood. They must be waiting for homeowners to leave so they could break in. It was a leap of logic so profound it could only be fueled by deep-seated prejudice, but to Tiffany it felt like vigilance. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, but her voice carried the frantic energy of a 911 call. "Yes, I need an officer at Heritage Oak Park immediately," she said, peering through the slats of her blinds. "There are 2 individuals loitering in the private park. They don't look like they live here. They're just sitting on the grass watching the houses. I think they're casing the neighborhood." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Were they armed? No. Were they threatening anyone? No. What were they doing? "They're eating," Tiffany said, as if the act of consuming lunch was a prelude to a felony. "But they don't belong here. We've had packages stolen recently, and I'm just very uncomfortable." The call was logged. The description was given a black male and female middle-aged sitting on the north lawn. Officer Brock Danner, patrolling 2 miles away, took the call. "I'm en route," he said. He didn't hear people eating lunch. He heard suspects casing houses. He heard outsiders. And his mind, much like Tiffany Miller's, began to write the report before he even turned his steering wheel. Officer Danner had a reputation in the precinct, though not the one he thought he had. He viewed himself as a hard charger, a policeman's policeman. His colleagues viewed him as a liability waiting to happen. In his 5 years, Danner had accumulated 9 citizen complaints. Most were for rudeness or unprofessional conduct. 2 were for bias-based policing. Both had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded due to a lack of video evidence or independent witnesses. This lack of accountability had emboldened him. He believed he had a 6th sense for crime, a gut instinct that was never wrong. He didn't know that his gut was actually just a collection of stereotypes wrapped in a badge. As he drove toward Heritage Oak Park, he visualized the encounter. He would roll up hard. He would dominate the scene. He would identify these trespassers, run them for warrants, and escort them out of his district. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb of the park at 12:23 p.m., mounting the sidewalk slightly with his front tire, a tactic designed to intimidate. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his hand resting near his holster. He walked across the grass with a long, aggressive stride, heading straight for the couple on the blanket. Elena Ross looked up from her book as the shadow of the officer fell over them. She squinted against the sun, expecting perhaps a polite wave or a generic, "Good afternoon." Instead, she saw Officer Danner standing 6 feet away, legs spread in a tactical stance looming over them. "What are you folks doing here?" Danner asked. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. His voice was loud, cutting through the quiet chirping of the birds. Marcus Ross placed his tablet down on the blanket and removed his reading glasses. He was a man of immense patience, a surgeon who spent hours performing delicate operations where a single millimeter of error could mean death. He knew how to remain calm under pressure. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady. "We're having lunch. Is there a problem?" Danner didn't like the tone. It was too calm. It was too educated. It didn't fit the script he had written in his head. "The problem is this is a private park for residents only," Danner snapped. "I've got calls about suspicious people loitering. I need to see some ID to prove you live in this HOA. Otherwise, you're trespassing." Elena closed her book slowly. She had spent 25 years in the legal system. She had started as a public defender, moved to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and now sat on the federal bench. She knew the law better than Danner knew the back of his own hand. She also knew that in the state of Arizona, unless an officer has reasonable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed, a citizen is not required to provide identification. Eating lunch in a park was not a crime. "Officer," Elena said, her voice cool and authoritative, "we are residents. We live on Palo Verde Drive, 3 blocks from here. We are simply enjoying our property. We are not required to show you identification as we are not engaged in any criminal activity." Danner's jaw tightened. This was the trigger. He hated being quoted the law. He hated jailhouse lawyers who thought they knew their rights. "I don't care where you say you live," Danner said, stepping closer, invading their personal space. "I have a complaint of trespassing. That gives me reasonable suspicion to identify you. Now let's see the ID or we're going to have a different conversation." Marcus reached out and touched Elena's arm gently, a signal to let him handle it. He didn't want this to escalate. He knew the dangers young, aggressive officers posed to black men regardless of their tax bracket. "Officer, my name is Dr. Marcus Ross. This is my wife, Elena. We have lived here for 12 years. If you check your computer, you will see a registered alarm permit for the Ross residence on Palo Verde Drive. We are not trespassers. We are your neighbors." It was a reasonable offer. A competent officer would have walked back to his car, checked the name, verified the address, and apologized. But Danner wasn't listening to verify. He was listening to detect deceit. He didn't believe a black man in shorts was a doctor living in a $3 million home. He thought it was a cover story. "I'm not playing games with you," Danner said, his voice rising. "Stand up, both of you. Put your hands where I can see them." The dynamic in the park shifted instantly. It went from a conversation to a detention. Elena stood up, her movements graceful but rigid with anger. Marcus stood beside her, his hands raised slightly to show they were empty. "This is a mistake, officer," Elena said, her eyes locking onto Danner's sunglasses. "A very expensive mistake. I am advising you right now that you do not have probable cause for this detention. You are violating our Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. I am asking you to call your supervisor immediately." Danner laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "You want a supervisor? You can talk to one at the station. You're detained for trespassing and failure to identify." He reached for his handcuffs. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a profound burning fury. "Officer," she said, dropping the bomb she had hoped she wouldn't have to use. "I am a United States magistrate judge. My credentials are in my tote bag. If you touch me, if you put those handcuffs on me without cause, you are arresting a federal judicial officer. Do you understand what that means?" Danner paused for a fraction of a second. A smarter man would have paused longer. A smarter man would have asked to see the credentials. But Danner was deep in the tunnel vision of his own bias. He looked at Elena, a black woman in a sundress, and he simply could not reconcile her appearance with the authority she claimed. "Yeah, and I'm the police commissioner," Danner sneered. "I've heard it all before. Fake badges, fake titles. You people always have a story." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Elena went silent. There was nothing left to say. She knew that any further words would be twisted into resisting. She shifted her focus to witnessing. She memorized his nameplate, B. Danner. She memorized the time. She memorized the sneer on his face. "Turn around," Danner commanded. He grabbed Marcus's wrist first. He twisted the doctor's arm behind his back with unnecessary force, leveraging the shoulder joint. Marcus winced but remained silent, staring straight ahead. "Marcus Ross, you're under arrest," Danner announced. He ratcheted the cuffs too tight. Then he turned to Elena. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. He spun her around. "You too, Judge," he mocked. He cuffed her hands behind her back. The metal bit into her wrists. The click of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet park. By now, a few other neighbors had come out. A man walking a golden retriever stopped on the sidewalk, phone raised, recording. A gardener paused his leaf blower to watch. They saw two impeccably dressed middle-aged neighbors being treated like violent felons by a young officer who looked like he was hunting sport. "You are making a grave error," Marcus said quietly as Danner shoved him toward the patrol car. "I am the chief of surgery at St. Joseph's. I have patients waiting." Danner ignored him. He opened the back door of the cruiser and pushed Marcus inside. He then grabbed Elena by the elbow and marched her to the other side. As he pushed her head down to get her into the vehicle, Elena looked him dead in the eye. "Officer Danner," she said, her voice calm and terrifyingly final. "My badge number is USMJ 402. Remember that when you are explaining this to the FBI." Danner slammed the door in her face. He walked around to the driver's seat, adrenaline pumping, feeling the rush of a good bust. He sat down, radioed dispatch. "One adult male, one adult female in custody, trespassing, uncooperative, en route to District 4. He put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the picnic blanket, the expensive cheese, and the open book lying on the grass as evidence of the crime that never happened. The drive to the District 4 station took 20 minutes. It was a silent ride. In the back seat, Elena and Marcus leaned against each other as best they could in the cramped plastic cage. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They had been married for 30 years. They communicated in looks and breaths. Elena was already drafting the federal complaint in her mind. She was organizing the sequence of events, the lack of probable cause, the excessive force, the failure to investigate. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a judge, building a case. Danner in the front seat hummed along to the radio, oblivious to the fact that the two people in his back seat had the power to dismantle his entire existence. When they arrived at the precinct, Danner pulled into the sally port. He hauled them out of the car, parading them through the back entrance toward the booking desk. The station was busy. Officers were typing reports, phones were ringing. Danner walked his callers up to the high desk where the watch commander sat. Sergeant Thomas Miller, no relation to the caller, was 58 years old, a veteran of the force with 30 years on the job. He was tired, cynical, but fair. He looked up over his reading glasses as Danner approached. "What do you got, Danner?" Miller asked, rubbing his temples. "Trespassing Sarge," Danner said, puffing his chest out. "Found 'em in Heritage Oak. Refused ID. Claimed they lived there but couldn't prove it. Gave me a hard time." Miller looked at the suspects. He saw a man in a polo shirt who looked like he belonged on a golf course and a woman in a linen dress who looked familiar. Miller squinted. He leaned forward. He looked at Elena Ross. He looked at her face, her poise, the way she held her head high despite the handcuffs. Then he looked at the computer screen on his desk where a daily bulletin from the federal court was open. He looked back at Elena. His blood ran cold. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am, are you Judge Ross?" Elena nodded once. "I am Magistrate Judge Elena Ross, United States District Court, and this is my husband, Dr. Marcus Ross." The silence that fell over the booking area was instant and absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb has been dropped but hasn't exploded yet. Miller came around the desk so fast he nearly tripped. "Danner, give me the keys," he barked. Danner looked confused. "Sarge, they're suspects. She's claiming—" "Give me the damn keys," Miller roared, snatching the handcuff key from Danner's hand. He unlocked Elena's cuffs with shaking hands. "Judge, I am so sorry. I don't know what I apologize, Your Honor." He unlocked Marcus next. "Doctor, my apologies." Danner stood there, his mouth slightly open, the realization creeping in like a slow poison. "Sarge, she didn't have ID. She said—" Miller spun on him, his face purple with rage. "Shut up, Danner. You arrested a federal magistrate judge. Did you even look at them? Did you verify anything?" The caller said. Danner stammered. "I don't care what the caller said," Miller yelled. "You put handcuffs on a federal judge and the chief of surgery. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Elena rubbed her wrists. There were red, angry welts where the metal had dug in. She looked at Danner not with anger but with pity. "Officer Danner," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. I told you who I was. I told you where I lived. You chose not to believe me because of what I look like. You chose to humiliate us rather than do your job." She turned to Sergeant Miller. "I want his badge number. I want the body camera footage preserved immediately, and I want to speak to the chief of police. Now." Miller nodded vigorously. "Yes, Your Honor. Right away, Your Honor." "Danner, get in the captain's office. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just sit there and pray." Danner walked toward the office, his legs feeling like lead. He looked back once. The judge was already on the phone, and the doctor was examining his own wrist with a clinical eye. Danner knew in that moment that his life as a police officer was over. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time the Rosses were driven home in an unmarked command vehicle driven by a captain, the video from the neighbor had hit the internet. The visual was undeniable, a calm, elegant black couple being manhandled by a white officer in a park. The headline wrote itself, "Racist Officer Arrests Federal Judge for Eating Lunch." The Scottsdale Police Department was besieged. The chief issued a statement within 4 hours, calling the arrest an inexplicable departure from policy. But apologies were not enough. Not for this. Civil rights attorney David Thorne took the case. The lawsuit filed against the city of Scottsdale, the police department, and Brock Danner personally was a masterpiece of legal argumentation. It alleged false arrest, assault, battery, defamation, and violation of civil rights under Section 1983. But the most damaging part of the lawsuit was the discovery phase. Thorne subpoenaed Danner's entire personnel file. They found what everyone suspected: the 9 previous complaints, the pattern of stopping Black and Latino motorists for suspicious activity that resulted in no citations, the supervisors who had flagged him for aggression but sent him to a one-day seminar instead of taking him off the street. The system had protected Danner, nurtured his bias, and unleashed him on the public. It just so happened that he finally bit a victim who had the teeth to bite back. The lawsuit also named Tiffany Miller, the caller. While she couldn't be sued for a civil rights violation in the same way she was sued for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her employer, a major pharmaceutical company, saw the news. They heard the recording of her 911 call where she equated eating while black with casing houses. They fired her 3 days later. Tiffany Miller, who had wanted to protect her property value, ended up losing her job and becoming a pariah in the very neighborhood she tried to gatekeep. The city of Scottsdale didn't even try to fight it. The video was too damning. The victim was too powerful. The optics were a nightmare. They settled the case in mediation. The final figure was $6.4 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single incident of wrongful arrest in the state's history. But the money was just the financial penalty. The real cost was the structural purge that followed. Brock Danner was fired. But Judge Ross wasn't satisfied with the firing. She pushed the Arizona Peace Officer Standards and Training Board to decertify him. Danner fought it, claiming he made a good faith mistake. The board didn't buy it. They revoked his certification. He would never carry a badge or a gun in the United States again. At 32, he was unemployed, branded a racist by the national media, and facing personal liability for the portion of the lawsuit the city refused to cover. He ended up moving back to his hometown in Ohio, working in a warehouse far away from the power he had abused. The lesson here isn't just about a bad apple. It's about the barrel. It's about a system that allowed Danner to operate for 5 years with unchecked bias. It's about a culture that teaches officers that their authority is absolute, and that citizens, especially black citizens, are subjects to be controlled rather than neighbors to be served. Elena and Marcus Ross were lucky. They had the status, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back. They had the credentials to prove Danner wrong. But what about the people who don't? What about the young man who isn't a doctor, the woman who isn't a judge, who fights for them when an officer like Danner decides they don't belong? That afternoon in the park was supposed to be a quiet lunch. Instead, it became a $6.4 million expose of the rot at the heart of policing. As the sun sets on Heritage Oak Park today, the Rosses still go there. They still sit on the grass. But now when police cruisers drive by, they slow down. The officers wave respectfully. They know who lives there. But it shouldn't take a federal judgeship to earn that wave. It shouldn't take a lawsuit to earn basic human dignity. We have to ask ourselves how many Brock Danners are still out there patrolling your streets waiting for a call from a Tiffany Miller. And what are we going to do to stop them before the next settlement is paid in blood instead of dollars? Do you think police departments should be required to carry personal liability insurance for officers with a history of bias complaints? Or should the taxpayers continue to foot the bill for racism? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think, if it made you angry, share it. Because the only way we change the system is by shining a light on it, one story at a time. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.